House Joint Resolution 109 is a Congressional Review Act resolution that would rescind the SEC's Staff Accounting Bulletin 121. I want to thank my colleague on the other side of the aisle, Congressman Nickel from North Carolina, for his leadership on this issue, as well as Senator Loomis, who is leading this effort in the United States Senate. For those who are not familiar, SAB 121 was guidance released by the SEC in March of 2022. Staff accounting bulletins are technical accounting guidance, not something we'd usually spend a lot of time debating during a committee markup. However, SAB 121 is different. It directs covered entities that custody digital assets to do so on balance sheet. The problem is that for banks, custodial assets are always considered off balance sheet for any other asset, like securities. The ramifications of requiring banks to hold these assets on balance sheet are pretty significant. If a bank were to custody digital assets according to the parameters of SAB 121, the on-balance sheet treatment would affect their other regulatory obligations like their capital and liquidity requirements. The end result is that banks must choose to either custody digital assets, thus inflating their balance sheet and severely affecting every other line of business, or stay entirely out of the market. That's not much of a choice at all. In effect, SAB 121 precludes banks from taking custody of digital assets altogether. Now, I'm sure there are a number of banks that don't have any interest in taking custody of digital assets right now anyway, that aside. But this SAB 121 prevents banks from effectively ever playing a custodial role for these assets. You're locking out the most regulated institutions from a market they know well, which is custody. There are some serious ramifications that stem from that. In January, the SEC approved 11 spot Bitcoin ETFs. These ETFs are giving a lot more retail investors the ability to invest in Bitcoin. Because of SAB 121, banks aren't able to serve as custodians for the Bitcoin within those ETFs. The lack of bank custodians for Bitcoin ETFs is particularly important because holding private keys to Bitcoin is akin to carrying physical cash. Both are bearer instruments, which means the holder of the asset is presumed to be in full control. That's a situation where you might want more bank custodians who are well-regulated experts on custody, on the job. As it is, there are only 4 total custodians for those 11 Bitcoin ETFs, and they are all non-banks. Think about that. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to submit 2 items describing this issue as it relates to Bitcoin ETFs. One is a joint op-ed on this topic from myself and Congressman Nickel, and the other is a letter from the American Bankers Association.
Without objection.
So how did we get to this point? Unfortunately, there were some serious problems with the process around SAB 121 and how it was issued. The SEC issued SAB 121 without conferring with the prudential regulators who are the experts on regulating bank custody. That's a pretty significant oversight. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell once said in front of the Senate Banking Committee that, quote, bank custody assets are off balance sheet, always have been, end quote. Had the SEC discussed this issue with the prudential regulators before issuing the bulletin, we might have avoided the situation we find ourselves in today. Number 2, the Government Accountability Office determined last year that SAB 121 actually meets the definition of a rule for purposes of the Congressional Rule Act. This means that according to the independent and nonpartisan GAO, SAB 121 is not really non-binding guidance at all and is in fact effectively a rule instructing regulated entities how to custody assets. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to submit the GAO's decision on SAB 121 into the record.
Without objection.
So in other words, the SEC issued guidance affecting banks without talking to the experts on bank custody. Think about that. The bank regulators and an independent body found that SAB 121 wasn't guidance at all, but a rule under the APA and CRA. Those are 2 big process fouls. If SAB 121 were truly non-binding guidance that the SEC claims, we would not be able to consider a CRA on the issue at all. The fact that we're even having this conversation today illustrates the scale of the SEC's mistake. I'm going to wind up here, but I want to just basically say that I think it is our responsibility to take this issue up in Congress. The SEC shouldn't arbitrarily prevent well-regulated banks from taking custody of investors' digital assets. Instead, it should find a different path forward with the prudential regulators. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.